I've alluded to this story in other subs, and some folks asked me to tell the entire story from the beginning and suggest it here. In 1999, when I was 13, my mother and I had just finished shopping at a grocery store in the evening after school and had taken our groceries out to the car. We were in the process of unloading the bags in the trunk of her old Honda Civic when I suddenly saw the car coming at us. I said, "Mom," in alarm, but it was too late. It haunts me that the last word I ever heard her say to me, with her back to the car, was, "What?" in an annoyed voice. I had been looking at comic books in the grocery store while she was checking out, and she had needed to raise her voice to get my attention to finally leave the store and catch up. The car sideswiped me on the left hip and hit her head on. I was knocked to the ground between her car and the one next to us. I didn't know it then, but the initial hit fractured my pelvis. As I struggled to get up, the car spun around 3 times in the parking aisle, hitting 6 parked cars, with my mother hanging onto the hood. It suddenly stopped, and she fell off. The car backed up, ran her over, backed up again, ran her over again, and then turned 90 degrees with its rear towards me. By this time, I had gotten to my feet with the desperate thought that I had to help her. The car responded by backing into me at 30 miles per hour, knocking me down again, and then pulled forward again. On autopilot, I struggled to my feet, or maybe my knees, for a third time, and the car backed into me again. This time, I fell backwards and fractured my skull on the pavement. Combined with a punctured lung, I couldn't even scream. I turned my head to the side and saw my mother's unblinking eyes, her white blonde hair stained red with blood. I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, and remember being loaded into an ambulance and weakly telling the EMT not to give me N4, as I was scared of needles. He laughed and said he couldn't guarantee that. I woke up 2 days later in the ICU and learned officially of my mother's death. I found out I had flat-lined in the ambulance at one point. In addition to my skull and pelvis, I looked like Two-Face, with second-degree road burn all down the side of my face. I was missing a front tooth, and my jaw was fractured. My right ear was found away from my body, and reattached. I had a chunk out of the back of my right leg down to the bone taken out by the runaway shopping cart. Both my knees were injured. I had internal bleeding from a lacerated liver and spine. I had not 1, but 5 IVs in my hand. I was determined to walk at her funeral, and I rose from my wheelchair and did. It took me years of therapy and reflection to realize that the reason I am not attracted to heavy makeup is because they had to put so much makeup on her to have an open casket that she looked like a porcelain doll. I'm sure many of you are wondering, reading this, what happened with the other driver to cause this. Well, she was an 89-year-old retired schoolteacher, well loved by the community. She had senile dementia and thought the accelerator was the brake, and vice versa. She had caused a serious accident just the year before on the highway and was given her license back. Even after her car finally came to a stop, bystanders had to remove her keys from the ignition as she had no idea what had happened, and did not understand what happened until the day she died, aged over 100. She was charged with negligent homicide and those charges were ultimately dropped. There were several rumors about why, but since I have no proof I won't share them here. As part of the police investigation, I was interviewed in the hospital and asked to draw a map of the accident scene. I was told later that I had drawn the most accurate map of any of the many witnesses who had been present. I believe that this is the case because I distinctly remember viewing the scene as though from above, as if I was looking down over a cliff and seeing my body lying on the concrete. When I tell this story in person, sometimes people will be crying at this point. I understand, and I can't argue. It was the worst day of my life and the aftermath was equally difficult, recovering physically, emotionally, and having to build a very different relationship than before with my father. Fortunately, I've had 20 years to process all this, and if you would like a silver lining to this story, it's that without the insurance money from my mother's death, I would have never been able to go to college, I would have never met my wife, we would have never been able to buy a car, or a house, and we would never have had our beautiful daughter, who has her grandmother's blonde hair, and her initials.